The night had not yet ended, but the world was already changing. In the quiet darkness before dawn, the city of Jerusalem held its breath. The streets were still. The Passover crowds, once loud and joyful, were now silent, unaware that history was about to be written in blood. Because somewhere in that city a trial had begun. An illegal trial, a rushed trial. A trial that would decide the fate of one man, Jesus Christ, just hours earlier. Jesus had been in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying, not for escape, not for rescue, but for strength, and then they came, soldiers, temple guards, and leading them, one of his own, Judas Iscariot. He stepped forward, pretending affection. "Rabbi," he said, and kissed him. That kiss, meant to show love, became the signal for betrayal. The soldiers moved in. They seized Jesus. The disciples panicked. Fear scattered them into the night, all except one, who followed at a distance, Simon Peter, bold, loyal, passionate, but tonight afraid. He lingered in the shadows as Jesus was taken to the high priest's house. A courtyard fire burned, and Peter slipped in among the crowd, trying to blend in, trying not to be noticed, trying not to be next. Inside, the trial had already begun. It wasn't lawful, it wasn't fair, it was desperate. The religious leaders had already decided what they wanted. They just needed a reason. False witnesses were brought in, one after another, but their stories didn't match. The room grew tense, frustrated, until finally 2 men stepped forward. This man said, "I can destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." The accusation hung in the air. All eyes turned to Jesus, but he said nothing. No defense, no argument, just silence. The high priest stood up, furious. "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men bring against you?" Still silence. Then came the question, the real question. "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." This was it, the moment Jesus looked at him. Calm, unshaken, and then he spoke. "You have said so. But I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." The room exploded. The high priest tore his clothes. "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses?" The others shouted in agreement, "He deserves death." And just like that, the verdict was sealed. What followed was brutal, cruel. They blindfolded him, struck him, spat on him. "Prophesy." They mocked. "Who hit you?" The one who had healed the sick now stood beaten. The one who had calmed storms now endured chaos. The King of Heaven mocked by men. In the courtyard, Peter sat by the fire, trying to stay unnoticed, but someone recognized him. "You were with Jesus of Galilee," a servant girl said. Peter shook his head quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." He moved away, but another voice spoke up. This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. Again, Peter denied it. "I swear, I don't know the man." The pressure was building, the fear tightening around him. Then a group approached. "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." And Peter snapped, "I don't know the man." At that exact moment, a rooster crowed, and suddenly everything froze. Peter remembered Jesus had told him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And now it had happened. Peter turned, and their eyes met. Jesus, bruised, beaten, standing in chains, looked at him, not with anger, not with condemnation, but with sorrow and love. Peter ran and wept bitterly. As dawn broke, the religious leaders made their next move. They had condemned Jesus, but they couldn't execute him. Only the Romans could do that. So they bound him and led him away to the Roman governor, a man named Pontius Pilate. Pilate wasn't interested in religious disputes. He wanted order, stability, peace. But when they brought Jesus before him, the accusations changed. He claims to be a king. That got Pilate's attention. He questioned Jesus directly. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied simply, "You have said so." Pilate studied him. This wasn't a rebel. This wasn't a threat. This man didn't look like someone starting a revolution. Pilate turned to the crowd. "I find no basis for a charge against this man," but the leaders pushed harder. "He stirs up the people all over Judea." Pilate hesitated. Then he had an idea. Hearing that Jesus was from Galilee, he sent him to Herod, passing the problem along. Hoping to avoid the decision, Herod Antipas had heard about Jesus, the miracles, the teachings. He was curious, excited, even finally. He would see this man for himself. He questioned him again and again. But Jesus gave him nothing, no miracles, no answers, just silence. Herod grew frustrated. Then amused, he mocked him, dressed him in a royal robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Now Jesus stood again before Pilate, beaten, mocked, rejected, and yet still silent, still composed, still resolute. Pilate knew one thing for certain. This man was innocent. But outside, the crowd was growing louder, more dangerous, more demanding, and soon they would begin to shout. What started as a quiet arrest had become a public spectacle. What began in the shadows was about to explode in the open. The crowd would choose. The governor would decide, and the fate of Jesus would be sealed. The morning had fully come, but instead of light bringing clarity, it brought chaos outside the governor's palace. A crowd was forming. At first, it was scattered. Small groups whispering, watching, waiting, but then it grew. Louder, angrier, more restless. And at the center of it all stood a bound and beaten man. Jesus Christ inside Pontius Pilate paced. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. He had already questioned Jesus, already examined him, and his conclusion was clear. I find no basis for a charge against him, no crime, no rebellion, no guilt, but the crowd outside didn't care about justice. They wanted something else. Pilate remembered a tradition. Every year during Passover, the governor would release one prisoner, chosen by the people, a gesture of goodwill, a political move, a way to keep peace. And Pilate saw an opportunity. If the crowd chose Jesus, he could set him free without conflict. So he brought forward another prisoner, a man well known to the people, a criminal, a rebel, a murderer, Barabbas. Pilate stood before the crowd. "Which one do you want me to release to you?" he asked. "Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Surely, he thought, the choice is obvious. But something strange happened. The chief priests moved through the crowd, whispering, influencing, stirring anger, manipulating the moment, and suddenly the voices began to rise. Barabbas. Pilate blinked, confused. What shall I do, then, with Jesus who is called the Messiah? The answer came like a wave. Crucify him. Pilate stepped back. What crime has he committed? He asked. But reason didn't matter anymore. Truth had no place here. The crowd roared louder. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The sound echoed through the streets, through the walls, through history itself. Pilate saw what was happening. This was no longer about justice. It was about control. And if he didn't give the crowd what they wanted, things could spiral, a riot, an uprising, a report to Rome. And that would cost him everything. So he did something symbolic, something desperate. He called for water and washed his hands before the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." But the crowd answered without hesitation, "His blood be on us and on our children." And just like that, the decision was made. The chains were removed, but not from Jesus, from Barabbas. The guilty man walked free. The innocent man remained bound. A perfect exchange, a guilty life traded for a sinless one. And the crowd watched as justice was reversed. Before the crucifixion, there was something worse. Remain scourging, Pilate ordered it, perhaps hoping that punishment alone would satisfy the crowd, perhaps hoping to avoid the cross. But this punishment was brutal beyond words. Jesus was taken by the soldiers, stripped, tied to a post, and then the whip came down. Again and again, and again, each strike tearing flesh, each blow ripping skin, the whip, embedded with bone and metal. Cut deep, blood ran, the body weakened. But the soldiers didn't stop, because to them, this was just another prisoner when they were done. They decided to have some fun, cruel fun. They twisted together a crown, not of gold, but of thorns, sharp, piercing. They pressed it onto his head. Blood trickled down his face. Then they draped a robe over his shoulders, a faded scarlet cloth. Look, they laughed, "The King of the Jews." They knelt before him, mocking worship, striking him, spitting on him. "Hail, King of the Jews." The King of Heaven, reduced to a joke, Pilate brought Jesus out again, now beaten, bleeding, barely recognizable. "Behold the man," he said, perhaps hoping the sight would soften them, that pity would replace rage, that mercy would win. But instead, the crowd grew louder. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate turned to Jesus. "Where do you come from?" he asked, but Jesus gave no answer. Frustrated, Pilate said, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" And then Jesus spoke, quietly, powerfully. "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." Pilate froze. This wasn't fear. This wasn't weakness. This was something else, something divine. The leaders played their final card. "If you let this man go," they shouted, "you are no friend of Caesar." Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. That was it. That was the threat. Not just a riot, but treason. Pilate had no more options, no more escape. He sat down on the judgment seat. The crowd fell into a tense silence. "This is your king," Pilate said. "Take him away." They shouted, "Crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" "We have no king but Caesar." And with those words they rejected everything. Pilate gave the order. Jesus would be crucified. The most painful, the most humiliating, the most brutal form of execution the Romans had, reserved for criminals, slaves, enemies of the state. And now for him the soldiers took Jesus, placed the wooden beam on his shoulders, heavy, rough, soaked with the weight of death. And they led him out, through the streets, through the crowds, toward a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. The journey had started. But Jesus was already weak. The beating, the blood loss, the exhaustion, step by step, he struggled, until finally he fell, the cross crashing down beside him. The soldiers looked around. They needed someone else, and they found him. A man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene. They forced him to carry the cross behind Jesus. As they walked, a group of women followed. Crying, mourning, broken, Jesus turned to them. Even now, thinking of others. "Daughters of Jerusalem," he said, "do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. Even on the way to death, he spoke truth, he warned, he cared." The hill was near, the place of execution, the place where everything would change. The cross was ready, the nails were waiting, and the sky was about to bear witness. The hill stood silent, barren, unforgiving, a place known by one name, Golgotha, the place of the skull. This was where it would happen. This was where the story of humanity would collide with the mercy of God, and at the center of it all, Jesus Christ. The soldiers wasted no time. Crucifixion was routine to them. Just another execution, another body, another day. They stripped Jesus again. The robe they had mockingly placed on him was torn away, reopening wounds that had already been shredded by the scourging. Blood flowed freely, but still he did not resist. They laid the wooden beam on the ground, rough, splintered, cold, and then they forced him onto it. The moment had come. The soldiers took the nails, heavy, sharp, unforgiving. They stretched his arms across the wood, and then the hammer fell, one strike, then another, driving iron through flesh, through bone, into the wood beneath. The sound echoed across the hill, a sound that history would never forget. They did the same to his other hand, then his feet, pinning him to the cross, locking him into suffering, and still no curses, no resistance, only silence. The soldiers lifted the cross, slowly, roughly, and dropped it into place. The impact sent shockwaves through his body. Pain surged through every nerve. Every breath became a struggle. Every second agony, and above his head they placed a sign, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, written in multiple languages, so everyone could read it, so everyone could see. The chief priests protested. "Don't write King of the Jews," they said. Write that he claimed to be king. But the Roman governor had made his decision. "What I have written, I have written." At the foot of the cross the soldiers sat down, not in mourning, not in reflection, but in boredom. They divided his clothes among themselves, but his garment was seamless, woven in one piece, so instead of tearing it, they gambled for it, rolling dice, laughing. As the Son of God suffered above them, the crowd gathered, some out of curiosity, some out of hatred, some out of grief. They stared, they whispered, and then they mocked. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Let him come down now, and we will believe in him." Even the religious leaders joined in. The very men who had condemned him now ridiculed him, and the criminals beside him. At first they joined in too, and then Jesus spoke, not in anger, not in pain, but in forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." The words hung in the air, unbelievable, unimaginable, in the middle of torture, he chose mercy. 2 men hung beside him, both guilty, both condemned, both facing death. At first, they insulted him like the others. But then something changed. One of them looked at Jesus, really looked, and saw something different, something divine. He turned to the other criminal. "Don't you fear God?" He said, "We are punished justly, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he looked back at Jesus and said the simplest, most powerful request, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus turned his head, through blood, through pain, through exhaustion, and he answered, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Even on the cross, he was still saving, still redeeming, still offering hope. Near the cross stood a small group, faithful, broken, watching. Among them, his mother, Mary. She had carried him, raised him, watched him grow, and now she watched him die. Beside her stood a disciple, John the Apostle. Jesus looked at his mother, then at John, and even in that moment, he cared. "Woman, here is your son," he said. And to John, "Here is your mother." From that moment on, John took her into his home, even while dying. Jesus provided, and then something strange happened. At noon, the brightest time of day, the sky went dark. Not clouds, not a storm, but darkness. Deep, unnatural, terrifying. It covered the land for 3 hours, as if creation itself was mourning. And in that darkness, Jesus cried out, a loud voice, a broken voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The words pierced the silence. This was the weight, the burden, the moment where he carried the sin of the world. Separation, pain, beyond physical suffering. Something deeper, something eternal, knowing everything was now completed. Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A soldier took a sponge, soaked it in sour wine, lifted it to his lips, a small act in a sea of cruelty, and then the moment came, the mission complete, the purpose fulfilled. Jesus took one final breath and declared, "It is finished," not defeat, not surrender, but completion. Victory, the plan fulfilled. Then he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And with that he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. At that very moment the earth shook violently. Rocks split apart, and inside the temple in Jerusalem, something incredible happened. The curtain, the thick veil separating people from the Holy of Holies, was torn in two from top to bottom. Not by human hands, but by God. The barrier was gone. Access was opened. A Roman centurion stood nearby. He had seen death before, many times, but not like this. Not like him. He looked at Jesus, at the darkness, at the earthquake, at everything that had just happened, and he said, "Surely this was the Son of God." The crowd grew quiet. The mocking stopped. Fear replaced it. Many beat their chests and left, shaken, uncertain, changed. The cross still stood. The body still hung, but the world would never be the same again, because on that hill, on that day, love had paid the ultimate price. The sky had gone quiet. The darkness had lifted. But something had changed, something irreversible on a hill called Golgotha. Death had done its work, or so it seemed. The body of Jesus Christ still hung on the cross, lifeless still, and yet the story was not over. The day was coming to an end, and this was no ordinary day. It was preparation day. the day before the Sabbath, according to Jewish law. Bodies could not remain on crosses during the Sabbath, especially not during Passover. So the religious leaders went to Pontius Pilate with a request. They wanted the bodies removed quickly, before sunset, to speed up death. Roman soldiers used a brutal method. They broke the legs of those being crucified. Without the ability to push up for breath, suffocation came quickly. The soldiers approached the first criminal, then the second, crack, crack, but when they came to Jesus, they stopped. He was already dead. No need, no breaking, but one soldier needed to be sure. He took a spear and drove it into Jesus' side, and immediately blood and water flowed out. A final confirmation. He was truly gone. The scriptures had been fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken, and they will look on the one they have pierced. Nearby stood those who had followed him, watched everything. Among them were women who had been with him from the beginning. Mary Magdalene, Mary, and others. They saw where he died. They saw where he would be laid. They would not forget as the sun began to fall. A man stepped forward, not loudly, not boldly, but quietly, courageously. His name was Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, a man of influence, but also a secret follower of Jesus. Up until now he had stayed hidden, afraid of the other leaders, afraid of being exposed. But something about this moment changed him. Fear gave way to courage, and he went to Pilate. "Sir," Joseph said, "may I have the body of Jesus?" Pilate was surprised. Already dead? He called the centurion, confirmed it, and then granted permission. Just like that, the body was released. Joseph wasn't alone. Another man joined him. A man who had once come to Jesus at night, curious, searching now. Committed Nicodemus, he brought spices, a mixture of myrrh and aloes, costly, honoring, enough for a king together. They took the body down from the cross. Carefully, gently, the same body that had been beaten, now treated with dignity, with reverence, with love. They wrapped him in linen cloths, layered with spices, following Jewish burial customs. Every movement, slow, heavy, final, near the place of crucifixion. There was a garden, and in that garden a tomb, new, unused, cut into the rock. It belonged to Joseph, and now it would hold the body of Jesus. They carried him inside, laid him on the stone slab, and stepped back. For a moment, silence filled the tomb. Then they rolled a large stone across the entrance, sealing it, closing it, ending it, or so it seemed. The women followed at a distance, watching everything, seeing where he was laid, memorizing the place. They would return after the Sabbath to finish what had been started, to anoint his body properly. But for now they had to leave. As the sun set, the Sabbath began, a day of rest. But there was no rest in their hearts, only grief, only confusion, only silence. The one they had followed, the one they believed in, was gone, but not everyone was at rest. The chief priests and Pharisees remembered something, a statement Jesus had made. After 3 days, I will rise again. They didn't believe it, but they feared it, feared that his disciples might steal the body and claim a resurrection. So they went again to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said he would rise after 3 days. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure. Pilate agreed. "Take a guard," he said. "Make it as secure as you know how." So they went, sealed the stone, placed guards at the tomb, Roman soldiers. Trained, alert, unyielding, no one would get in. No one would get out, and so the tomb stood sealed. The guards stood watch. The city returned to its rhythm, but beneath the surface, something was building, something unseen, something unstoppable, because death had not won, not yet. The darkest day in history had come to an end. The cross stood empty, the tomb was sealed, hope seemed buried, but what looked like defeat was only the beginning, because in just a few days everything would change. The stone would roll away, the grave would be empty, and the world would never be the same again. What happened next shocked the world. Don't miss the resurrection story coming next.